communication over performance.
Mm.
And that's, I've been thinking about it recently, and it's really important because back to the school days, we're really used to performing, to being rated. So when we're speaking, you talked about it, like people try to build the whole sentence and sound sophisticated, and that's getting in the way of the learning because you just can't do it at that specific point. And I've reflected on it on my own journey, and that's the source of frustration many times, like wanting to perform as opposed to communicate.
Students really want to straight away say really complex things, and it's like, like this gradual thing, like, okay, now we can start speaking, but a little bit. Yeah.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
and like they just really want to, and and I'm like, okay, but well, again, trying to educate, like circumlocution, if you don't know that word, well, you don't know it, just say what you do know. But they just really want to say these whole complex things.
Hi, Pauli.
Hi.
And well, welcome to the podcast. First of all, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Awesome. And yeah, before we get started, just like a little menu. So we're gonna talk about your language background, right? All the languages that you've learned, how you've learned them, what worked for you, what didn't. Yeah, like all the steps when it comes to learning a language. Then we'll talk about your channel as well, how you're teaching Slovak with stories, and much more. So that's the menu for today. Hmm,
Yeah, it sounds good.
Awesome. So yeah, why don't you start telling us a little bit about your language background, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So I'm I have one native language, which is Slovak. I kind of get Czech as a bonus because we have this kind of situation with Czech and Slovak kind of semi-communication. But all the other languages that I've learned, I learned them in formal study, for example, at school. So I started learning English when I was 6 years old. This is quite normal in Slovakia. Well, actually, even before English, I was learning some German in kindergarten. Yeah, but 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 I remember like two sentences from looking the books, honestly. But then I think when I was around 12, I picked up German again at school. But really, this is quite normal in Slovakia for everyone to have languages this early. Well, I think now it's like they have to start one language from 8 years old and the second one from around 12. But yeah, so I was doing English, German. Then when I was about 15, I had French at school. But I really liked it, like both at school, but also in my free time. I don't know what other children do in free time. Maybe they go to some, I don't know, like maybe play football or some other activities after school clubs. But my after school clubs were some language classes after school because I was really into it.
Nice.
And yeah, really, like I was, and also when I didn't have after school club, I was just like as a self study. I was sitting at home reading something, trying to decipher. Yeah, and I really loved it. And also, I can say that my first experiences of teaching are already starting at this time. When I was a teenager, one of my first job was like tutoring some neighborhood children. And again, it was because this is how I wanted to spend my free time, getting some teaching experience. Uh, um, and later, I was organizing some Esperanto courses just because I was very enthusiastic and I thought everyone should learn Esperanto. Because when I was about 17, I found out about Esperanto and became so enthusiastic. Have you heard of Esperanto? I can, we can talk about it more because sometimes people have some curiosity about it, or maybe some people don't know about it or have some misconceptions. But for me, it was really, I think, the most amazing, most valuable language learning experience of my life. She was really, really cool. And I did a lot of learning and in Esperanto. And yeah, and guess what I studied at university?
Languages, obviously, but trying to guess which one. Enough. Italian. Spanish.
Actually, I didn't learn Italian ever. I did, um, well, officially my degree is called Modern and Medieval Languages, Russian and Dutch, which is like the weirdest combination. I, by the way, went to the UK for university. So I moved to the UK, to Cambridge, and I think I'm honestly probably the only person with this combination of Russian and Dutch. Um, we were, for Dutch, there were 4 people in the whole year, and that was a big year because usually there was like 1 or 2 people for Dutch, and we were like, wow, 4 people. Um, but actually, after the first couple of years, I wasn't really doing continuing Dutch anymore. I forgot all of my Dutch, and I became really interested in Ukrainian, but at the time it wasn't possible at my university to do Ukrainian as like full degree, but I did what I could. And after Cambridge, I moved to Canada and I did a master's in Slavic languages and literatures. So again, continuing with this, and this is where I had also a really important language teaching experience because so in Canada it's normal that as graduate student you do some teaching as well. And I was teaching beginners Russian at the university, and apart from that, it was quite a few pieces that all came together. I had this teaching, but also I had some research assistantship, which is also connected to teaching. I was helping one really amazing professor with collecting some materials for a new course that she was designing. And also as part of my academic study, I had this module on methods of teaching Slavic languages. So it was just really perfect, like the combination of the teaching assistantship and research assistantship and the academic course. It was like really good, and it was like really supportive environment in the department. And they were not doing comprehensible input or anything like, we were doing like a communicative method, and I think CI is also a communicative method, but I mean more like this classic communicative method. But still, even though it's not exactly what I'm doing now at all, I'm still drawing on some ideas from this point of my life because I learned a lot here, even though it wasn't really the natural way or like based on Russian or anything. After that I had some break from teaching because I was doing other stuff. I moved to Sweden, did another degree which was not related to languages, and just did other stuff. Learned Swedish in the meantime, of course, because I was living there for several years. And then when I came back to Slovakia, then I started teaching, and I was, actually I have quite a lot of teaching experience in like different actually teaching different subjects, not only languages. And in primary school, secondary school, university, as I said, adults, all sorts of stuff. But I started first teaching a different subject at the school, but then at the school we had some exchange students that came for a year, and they had Slovak lessons with me. This is when I started, and actually this is when I started using CI or Crash, and this is when I discovered it. And it was really nice. And I continued teaching Slovak also in other settings, in some accessible courses for newcomers and refugees. And I did have quite a lot of freedom, so I was doing CI, and also this is when I started my YouTube channel. Basically, it was during COVID, when the teaching moved to online, of course, and in Slovakia we had a really long lockdown, and I realized that a lot of people just lost access to their Slovak courses, especially if it wasn't in terms of formal education. It wasn't like it moved to online, but they just didn't have anything. So that's why I decided to start, basically. And also because in general there is a lack of resources, especially free resources, and especially like natural way of teaching. There's nothing. I think for Slovak, I'm probably the only person doing that, to my knowledge. Yeah. And maybe, maybe almost the last part of my teaching journey. Well, not the last one, but almost the last is, so about a year ago, slightly more than a year ago, I moved to the UK again and did my teaching qualification to be a secondary school teacher, qualified here in the UK, focusing on languages. And that was actually one of the most difficult experiences I had, because at this point, I already had lots of clarity about how I want to teach, how I want to provide input. I had my own style, my own teaching philosophy, and it was really challenging to kind of try to operate within a system that's not necessarily aligned with that. Mm. But anyway, I managed to get my teaching qualification, but I am teaching, but not as part of that system. I'm just trying to do my own thing instead. So now I'm teaching mostly Slovak and doing a little bit of Esperanto skill or a little bit of other stuff, which is all fun. And when it comes to Slovak, I'm really lucky. I have the most ideal situation I could wish for, because I'm collaborating with an organization, Slovak Institute, because they are actually giving me a lot of freedom in teaching how I want to teach. And so I'm using a lot of comprehensible input-based methods. And yeah, I think we will talk about it in more detail maybe. And I was actually very surprised, positively surprised, when I decided, okay, I'm going to try just to offer these courses. And a lot of people were interested, like really within days. I had so many people registering. So I think there is a lot of interest in learning the natural way. So yeah, I think this is my journey. So as it says, I learned a lot of languages, but mostly, yeah, it's only kind of recently that I was learning it in more, maybe just acquiring it by, getting the input. I think I had a lot of instruction in more traditional ways. And also as a teacher, I tried so many different things. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I mean, that's a pretty large experience as a language learner and teacher. That's I love it, and it's. I mean, like it's clear, like you were interested from the beginning, right? Like you were like super passionate about languages. That's good. That's good. But I've got so many questions. I've got questions about language learning, like that part, language teaching. So let's start first with when you started in school, like learning English and those languages. I'm guessing it was mostly the traditional way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And do you remember actually learning the language, or was it later than that you learned? Let's start with Ayun, for example.
Yeah, the thing is, I was really good at English, but also at the other languages I had at school. I was really a good student. I was getting good grades. I was always like scoring high on tests, but it was like, um, yeah, like I don't know if it necessarily meant, or maybe I acquired something, but not thanks to um the instruction at school. But I don't want to put it down too much. Like maybe there was also some valuable stuff, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
but there wasn't a correlation between getting A grades and being able to communicate, right?
yeah, yeah, and I can tell you exactly, well, maybe like two cases where I realized that there was this misalignment, as you say. Well, actually, maybe the first time I noticed it was when I first lived abroad, and it was even before I moved to Cambridge. When I was 17, I moved to Scotland to spend one semester as an exchange student myself, like to improve my English. And at this point, I was so like I was one of the best students in English, and I got to Scotland, and suddenly it turned out, oh, okay, like in spontaneous communication, it's like doesn't help that much. But it's still like the stay in Scotland really helped me, because despite everything, I already had like a good enough basis that I could profit from the immersion. So I think the immersion helped me eventually a lot. And then also the other thing that helped me was reading books in English. But it was the case when I wasn't reading them because I wanted to improve my English, because it was like, oh, I really love this author and this book is not translated into Slovak or Czech yet, so I'm going to read it in English, right? And I think this is really what helped. And I think until now, I always recommend reading, like if people are passionate about it. But I think that's the problem, that people often are like, oh, I want to learn something, like I want to read something that's going to help me learn, that has the right vocab. And it's like, no, like just read something that you like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Because it doesn't feel like learning, right? But it is helping. Hmm. Yeah, true. Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of us with English, like because it's so present everywhere. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell what really helped you. I mean, now that you're a teacher, you've done so much research, you've been in so many courses when it comes to language learning, so but you probably had to reflect on it, right? Like that happened to me as well. Like it was later that I really, oh, so this was the thing that helped me with English, or this thing, right? But because we're surrounded by English everywhere, was it the classes? Was it the music I was listening to? Was it the books, like you said, that I was reading for pleasure? So it's always hard with English because there's so many different sources of input, right?
Yeah, like it's all like intertwined and you cannot like pick them apart so easily, because at the same time you're having the, I don't know, like you're having the lessons at school, but then you remember this lyric from the song and you use it in the essay you're writing for school, and it's like really connected. And you're right, it's hard to tease apart.
Yeah, like when people ask me about how I learned a specific language, when they ask me about English, like I actually learned the language before I came across comprehensive input and crashing and so on. So it's hard to tell. Like I try to think about it, but afterwards, with other languages that I've learned since, it's a bit easier to sort of isolate the things that really help me, right? So I'm also curious about like your next language other than English that you learn, or one language that you really feel like you've got a good level in it now, and how you learned that one.
Yeah, I don't, okay, because I think this is frustrating and probably not another good thing to say, but I think I even forgot so many languages that I was learning before. Like for example,
That happened.
but then at some points I'm surprised that it comes back when I need it. But really, well, for example, I was mentioning Dutch, like ever since my studies, I wasn't really using it, and I think I never achieved that level of really acquiring it, like to have it, uh, you know, I think the ones that I really acquired. Okay, I don't know if this is necessarily the cause or if there's some kind of correlation, but I think the languages that I'm good at are the ones where I lived in the country for some time, such as English or Swedish. Although English, I'm not sure if we can talk about it, because as you say, it's everywhere, wherever you live, like you have the TV shows or like whatever, or like when you want to be a professional in whatever field, like you're kind of forced to do it in English if you want to be on a good level. So, but yeah, for example, Swedish, because I spent several years there. Also, for example, um, yeah, Russian as well. Although I think forgetting again. But
Also,
so
Swedish could be a good example. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, but I don't know if it's really like, okay, like because I lived there and used it every day, like that's why. Uh, like I don't know again exactly how to tease it apart, because for example, right now I don't use it actively. Like I sometimes, I don't know, there are maybe still some podcasts or YouTube channels that I follow in Swedish and like I understand them, but it's not like I'm actually like spending a large proportion of my day. But I wouldn't say I've completely forgotten it. So I think I really acquired it to that level. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you moved to Sweden, did you know any Swedish or nothing at all? Or
That's a good question. And actually, you know what? It was actually kind of a negative experience for me, because I moved to Sweden quite spontaneously. Like that's another story, but I just decided, okay, I'm moving. And I didn't know any Swedish. And always before, with English, with Russian, I first learned the language. I knew it to a good level before moving there, or like, move there even because I wanted to improve the language. And now in Sweden, I suddenly found myself in this new country. And I think I felt, in a way, a lot of pressure to learn at a fast pace. because it's like, oh my God, in order to exist here, I need to master it quickly. So, but I think maybe that's when I partly started doing a more natural way. Again, like because the immersion was possible, but still, as I knew nothing, it was difficult to get a lot out of immersion. So I also combined with other method, like learning, memorizing vocab, like this kind of stuff. But also I spent hours every day watching some TV shows, and again, like TV shows that I liked, but also trying to find ones that were like comprehensible enough. Uh, so I think I already started. This was before I knew the theory uh, behind it, but yeah, but I think it was a mixed experience, like partly positive, but partly feeling this pressure and feeling like it's not like, oh, like I just enjoy Swedish, but more like, yeah, like it's better of survival,
Hmm. Yeah, that's always the danger of immersion. Like when, like you said, when you moved to England, your English was good enough to be able to understand, to be able to communicate, right? So then that experience could be amazing because it's going to take you to the next level, right? But if you move to a country and you know nothing, this is not some magical tool. It's not that language is in the air and as you breathe, it's going to get in. It doesn't happen that way. So it can be a bit of a shocking experience if you're starting from scratch and you move to a country. And was Sweden was a bit different because people speak English there, right? Or
Yeah, they do, but still, it was like I needed Swedish, like I felt it, but it's not. Yeah, it's an interesting question about the hegemony of English and how it influences whether we are actually forced to learn the language or not. So, yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, because I see it here in Poland all the time because I live in Poland.
All right.
And uh, you don't really need to learn the language to survive. Like, you know, by living here, you're going to learn enough to go to the supermarket and know, or the market, whatever. Like, you're going to learn the basics anyway, but you don't need it to get to the next level. Especially like I live in Krakow, which is an international city, so you can survive with English. I did learn the language because I wanted to, because I'm passionate about languages. Because actually, that's another story. But Polish was the language that started my process of realizing that there was something wrong with the traditional grammar approach. Because that was my first experience with a language so different than my own, that it was like, I don't know about this. Because as a native Spanish speaker, English, a lot of words are similar. French, languages like that, they're somewhat related. So you can sort of get away with it, but when I started with Polish, we're like, this is different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, like a few things in what you say are interesting. Well, obviously for me, like being a native Slovak speaker and already having, Slovak, Czech, Russian, Ukrainian, then when I was, no, I think I did have like a year of formal um, Polish course, but it was like once a week thing way back. But then when I found out about Russian and everything, I was like, okay, I'm just going to like teach myself Polish, like in this way. But I abandoned it quite quickly because I didn't really have much need for it. I,
Yeah.
didn't want to spend the time. So, like being a Slavic speaker, it's like, oh, well, like all of the Slavic languages are comprehensible for me. Then we can talk about, how to, bridge the gap between comprehending and, actually being able to speak the language and not just like,
That's the most important question, probably. But
question, but also, when you were talking about, I don't know, so I just want to name that I think there is something about the hegemonies of power and about, for example, I don't know if it's like your case, but like moving from the west to the east and being like, oh wow, like okay, like we welcome you more open-mindedly than moving from east to the west, like because I think this is why I felt that pressure in Sweden, because I already felt a bit, and to an extent here in England I feel it, like some pressure to speak well, and especially in professional setting, I can feel like I think that, like, I don't know, I don't want to get like maybe too into it, but I think there might be um some hidden pressures as well.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never felt that here. Like I said, I think because also Polish people mm, think that their own language is complicated, so there's
Oh yeah.
that they're okay with, I mean, they love it when people try, of course, and
Yeah.
like everyone, when people try speaking their language, but no, I've never felt that pressure. But yeah, that helps. But it was, yeah, I was just gonna say, sorry, that when I found out about crash and comprehensible input and so on, obviously I reflected on my journey learning English first, but then I started learning Italian, French, Portuguese because they're related, just like Polish for you, right? So I could understand way more than I could in a different language, like Polish, for example. And also, I think I got kind of the wrong idea of what it took to start being able to communicate in the language.
Yeah.
Because, similar structures. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not there yet, you can not fake it, but get away with, we call it portuñol, with like Portuguese and Spanish, or Itañol. You might be using words from a different language, but you can communicate. But with Polish and also German that I started three years ago, that's when I started to realize that maybe there's something missing when it comes to what you said, bridging the gap. Because with German, I started from scratch, and I've been able to get to a point in which I can understand native podcasts, and like my comprehension ability is like skyrocketing through pure input. Realize that speaking, it's a different animal. Like
Yeah.
it's not the process is not as smooth as I thought it was with Italian or Portuguese, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I want to get to this point because, like you said, the most important question is I started to think about things that I could do or that I needed to do to bridge that gap because
Mm-hmm.
I got to a point with Polish and German. Like Polish is probably the best example because I can understand pretty much everything. I mean, when it comes to, there's always people on the street that speak really fast, so it's hard to understand. But when it comes to podcast series, I understand. I mean, not everything that's in every word, but I understand the meaning always. But then speaking, I feel like my speaking is way behind. Even though I can communicate, but like everything's really simple, things like that. So that's when recently I started looking more into, hmm, is there anything we have to do to get better at speaking?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's your
What did you find the oh Phoenix?
I mean, so yeah, I'll go first. I mean, what I realized is that you do need to speak because I was one of those like pure input people. So all I did was listening to the language and read, which is still key. Don't get me wrong, but you need that. Like there's no way to learn the language without that because how you know it's impossible to get the language in your head otherwise, right? But sooner or later you get to a point in which I feel like with those two languages that I just mentioned, I feel like, I mean, of course I can get better at understanding, but it's really good already. But my speaking is like way behind, right? So I started to realize that practice is actually necessary, like speaking, right? So I'm actually in the process of starting with that. When it comes to German, I'm starting to like talk to myself and things like that. Or I'm listening to a podcast, so I'll just talk to myself, like a little summary of it afterwards, like a few minutes. Or as I'm cooking, I'm trying to sort of narrating what I'm doing in German. Things like that to also to bridge the gap between just input and the real world, right? So situations in which I'm producing in the language, but I don't feel the pressure of having to communicate with native speakers, and real time communication and all the struggles that come along with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm in the process of it, right? But that's what I'm mostly focused on recently, and with my students, to be honest, as well. Like, because as a Spanish teacher, I think I've been doing a good job of getting them to a point in which they can understand. I mean, they can
Yeah.
understand me as a native speaker speaking pretty fast and about a lot of different things, like barely adjusting my level of communication. But I see in them as well, like that second part, speaking the language, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of things that I'm doing. And then also, I haven't been doing it with German yet, but I did it with Polish and other languages, like language exchanges, for example.
Yeah.
Because again, both people are on the same page. Like they all feel the struggle. The it's a bit of a safer environment than just going out there and speaking the language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting that you yeah, because part of me is really pure Russianian and like wait, like we shouldn't need to speak, but also I feel that like it's difficult to bridge that. And like even when you mentioned language exchanges, I was like, well, shouldn't we be just doing crosstalk when we each speak our language, instead of like forcing ourselves to the output, like like to just get more input. But yeah, that's interesting. And like
Yeah, I've done crosstalk a lot too, just to.
at some point switch from crosstalk to like the traditional exchange. Yeah. Yeah. Ah, that's really interesting. I think part of it also depends on why you are learning a language because like because I think it's not like one size fits all because sometimes you are learning because like you don't need to actually speak it. For example, sometimes as I was studying on university level kind of literatures in foreign languages, and then okay, like sometimes I just needed to like be able to read the text and then I write the analysis in English. So like you, for example, or like do you live in the country again? Like are there pressures and expectations like to be able to speak it, or do you just live there and as you say like so like there is a lot like there can be some variation in how much you feel the desire to speak, how much you feel the need to speak, and if you can afford to go at a really slow pace, and if people can afford it, like my students, if it's like not like, but well, there's other things about this actually. But if they can, like, I'm really trying to like wait until they are ready. But often the thing is, they are really ready. Like they come really but at the same time really afraid of making mistakes and really obsessed with speaking accurately from the beginning. And I think it's difficult with students because they don't come as blank slates to you. I'm mostly teaching adults, so they've had like years of damage done to them. But even when I'm teaching like 12-year-old children, they already come with a little bit of damage. That sometimes it's not damage. Like sometimes there can be a positive side. Sometimes when you've had years of language learning experiences, you already found it out what works for you or what you think works sometimes. But and like you kind of know your learning style, so it can be positive, but also often like you get some ideas, some not helpful ideas about what language learning should be like it should be really difficult, like the more I'm struggling the more I'm learning. And so people are really eager to produce language but also anxious, and like it depends the exact situation on like what past experiences they've had, what messages they absorbed. But I think that's why I think I tried to do kind of some education about language learning and language acquisition, of course. And it doesn't click in right away, but kind of a little bit. And
Yep.
and I think I don't know, like I'm so torn about speaking. I think I'm still trying to figure it out because I think there is so much emphasis on speaking and like in the culture in general, even the way we say like to speak a language, like do you speak English rather than do you understand English or do you know English? And and people think that communication means speaking, but like there's more, that's one part of communication, like expressing yourself, but the other part is like interpreting meaning, and it's just as important. And I don't like I have like a whole I also like a whole theory about it, like how it's also in other parts of life that people are not used to listening to each other. Just because I'm also trained as conflict mediator, and you know why people cannot resolve conflicts, because they just never listen, just talk of it. And like if they manage, so like it's not really language learning. Think just kind of try to disrupt this narrative a little bit. Um, but then when it comes to the point when they do need to speak, when they do want to speak, I think, I mean, again, like I'm trying to teach about like metacognition, metacognitive regulation. So like how, like what works for them, why, and so on, and like be more aware of it. Um, I think, and also, another thing that I really got into in the past year or so is translanguaging. So like, um, it's all about embracing the multilingualism and using the whole linguistic repertoire. So not have this view. So it can be like a pedagogical concept, but also just theoretical, descriptive, where it's not like this monolingual kind of thinking where we think monolingualism is the norm and bilingualism is just like you speak two languages and you're supposed to speak them perfectly, but like you just speak them both badly, like for example, you speak Slovak badly and English badly. It's no, like it's like your whole kind of, it's more fluid, more dynamic, and trying to encourage like this is normal, like actually bilingualism or multilingualism doesn't look like these separate entities. And if you are, for example, when you were talking about when you have a similar language and you can get away with it, from the same language group, yeah, like that's fine, like if you are speaking, like if either my students or I speak kind of half in Slovak, half in Ukrainian, and okay, like that's part of it, like you still put the part of it in Slovak, and not and like not have this attitude, okay, like we're only speaking Slovak in this class, but just really really getting like using it to our advantage, the knowledge of other languages, and really seeing it as the, yeah, like the whole repertoire, like all the skills that you have and how the students are able to draw on them. And I think yeah, like in the past year or so, I'm trying to use it more consciously in the classroom. And yeah, but I think again, like people, I don't know, like some people are not so open to it. Some people are. It's because again, like there are these ideas about native speakerism, like and like yeah, and I think yeah, and as I said, just like not forcing production, but also if they want to speak, like not trying to stop them and leaving it up to them, like if they think they are ready, or like it's, I might have an opinion like what they're ready for, but it's not up to me, like it's up to them, and like what they feel confident in, what they feel comfortable in. But I think there is a lot of desire, so it's not like, well, actually, it depends, because when I was, for example, trying to teach languages, I was teaching, for example, German here in the UK at a secondary school. Yeah, then it is more like you have to force them to speak. They're not into it, and I don't like it. But like it's like, I don't know, like in this system where it's like output is like required in every lesson and so on.
Yeah, it depends on the student's age as well. Like teenagers might be a bit like shy to,
So sometimes they don't have the motivation, but for example, the Slovak students that I have, they have a lot of motivation. So it's not a problem. It's basically, I don't know, like, sorry, like now I'm having like stream of consciousness thing, like of all the different things that I'm doing, but kind of, yeah, like putting the different pieces and trying to see like what what's the right balance, let's say.
Yeah, there are a lot of nuances. It's complicated because there's when it comes to your students or to teaching, there's always a fine line between like not forcing output, but letting them or allowing them to be free to communicate. But then you also realize some students want to communicate, but when they communicate, they need to think about everything for a few seconds. And they have that style of, so they're thinking about everything. So that makes them focus on form as opposed to communication.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things, and yeah, but like the whole thing that I talked about before was because I've seen it in myself, and that also depends on the type of person you are, of course, whether you're more open or. But I've seen it with these languages that when I'm doing just input,
Mhm.
you know, I get comfortable, I get cozy. You know what I mean? Like
Oh.
it's so. I mean, like I'm still gonna do it that way at the beginning because that's what I need. But German and Polish, I got into a point in which I understand a lot, and it's comfortable to just sit at home and watch videos for an hour, 2 hours a day. That's still gonna help me, of course, but it's like I said, it's comfortable. And if my goal is to be able to communicate, like back to your point, if I just
Yeah.
want to be able to understand content in German, like I've reached my goal,
Yeah, yeah.
But if yeah, like assuming we're talking about being able to communicate in the language, not fluency, well that'd be ideal, but it's being able to communicate, like feeling like I feel when I speak English now, right? Um, that's what I've changed my mind a lot recently because I used to be like you said, I used to be like 100% input, output output would show up
Yeah.
constantly, and I still think input starts the process of outputting because you start like building those sentences in your head, like the language gets in your head to put it into simple words, right?
Yeah.
Is it necessary? I mean, no, is it enough? That's the question, right? Like it's necessary, but is it enough? And I feel like we need something else, right?
This is really interesting. Yeah, because I think, yeah, like you said, like I'm also like evolving my ideas about this. And it's also interesting. I had a point when I first started using some years back, when I really loved just teaching complete beginner course. And because I was working for this organization that was doing these 3-month free courses for newcomers, and I always was teaching this course like every 3 months to new groups. And they were offering some follow-up courses, and the students were like, oh, we want to have you also for the follow-up course. I'm like, no, 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 like a colleague is going to have you today. And I just wanted to do the beginner one. And I think it's because I didn't feel skilled at, like in the beginning, it was clear, like they just need input,
Yep.
uh, how to make it comprehensible, how to make it interesting. But then when it was like, oh, like, wait, now they can speak a little, and they were having quite a few. So it was 3 months, but I think 4 lessons a week or something. So it was like
That's
quite a lot. And I think now the courses that I'm offering now, I have different levels, and I'm still sometimes like struggling to like find the right balance. But I really love, for example, having these high level courses, which is like, oh, like you can just talk and like just some nuances will come up, and you can even talk about the grammar and stuff because they already have the acquisition at the level, and like they can, ask you in Slovak about the grammar point or whatever. But I really remember I was like not feeling confident in like, what do I do next? And now I'm maybe a bit more confident, but I think it's a constant process of like experimenting and like trying new things, like to find like a more optimal balance. And like, as you say, like it depends so much on the students, on the individual. Like honestly, like in every group, it's different. Like some are so talkative. Yeah.
no. The thing is, you want to get them to speak, but don't stress them too much So they need to think about everything, like, and back to your point, when they're complete beginners, because they just can't do it, you don't worry about it. You just like
Yeah.
input's all they need. And also, when you start a language from scratch and you understand what's going on, you understand the story or whatever it is, everything's like magical to you, right? So you just love it right away. Hmm. But later on there comes a point when speaking starts to become part of the equation. And yeah, that I think that's the most challenging part as teacher and then as a language student myself as well. Like back to my German and Polish experiences.
Yeah, I really understand. Like, I relate a lot to what you said about the cozy point when you're like, oh yeah, I can just like listen to this podcast and like never need to speak. And I noticed that maybe, when I think about those early language learning experiences, like as a teenager and like even in my early 20s, I was like also like some of my students like really into trying to speak. For example, when I was somewhere abroad and I met a person who had the same language that I'm learning, I was like, oh, I'm gonna talk to you, poor. But now I'm more shy. Like, I don't know if it's just as I get older or if it is because of some more negative language learning experiences, because I think it's quite interesting for me that I had my negative language learning experiences later in life, maybe in my mid-20s. Usually people have like a horrible time at school when they, had some trauma from it. And later when they're adults, they find their way. And I think for me, it was the opposite. Like I always had an amazing experience. I was always intrinsically motivated. And it was like in adulthood that I had the negative experiences. So I think maybe I'm still recovering from it or yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, in general, I think there's more nuances than we think. But yeah, it's like honestly, I had to have this conversation with myself because I felt it as a language student myself, like that I was getting too cozy, too comfortable in all the languages. And like I said, I wouldn't start speaking from day one. So that's not what I mean. But I've seen it with German that my level is good enough. And this is always kind of subjective or it's difficult to explain. But I always talk about it in this way. Like when I've been listening and reading to the language for quite some time, I understand a lot. And the language is already in my head. And this is the difficult part to explain. So I always say that when all of a sudden, I start building sentences in my head or imagining situations in which I use the language, I feel like the language is already in my head. Of course, with a lot of room for improvement. But so that's like a sign for me that I can start the process of, talking to myself for a minute a day at the beginning, like simple things that help me bridge the gap. Because again, I'm talking about the need to practice, but if you try to practice the first day you start with a language, there's nothing here. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna fall back to your language, try to translate, so it's gonna be weird. I don't think it's helpful, to be honest. But I could change my mind again. No, I don't think so at this point. But so in general, I think like input is necessary, and the most important thing is still comprehensible input, of course. But that missing part, it's important, I think.
Yeah. And like you're talking about really important questions, like when is the point, like when you are ready, like how to recognize it. And also like it's not just one point. Okay, like now I've had this and this many hours of input, boom, now I'm going to start speaking. Like it's more gradual, and how to make it, as you say, like the gradual ones, like 1 minute a day I can start, or what are the steps. And I think we don't have like, yeah, I think yeah, I'm trying to figure it out, like what's the smaller steps, how to make it happen.
Yeah, and I've also been trying to document my journey in terms of how many hours of input I needed to get to a specific point. Like to try to help people to get an idea of how much it might take them. But still, it's there's gonna be a lot of different situations, different people. So it's more like a range, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the best explanation I've been able to come up with, like to when I'm ready to start communicating, is the one I just mentioned. That it's
Yeah.
like randomly I start building sentences in my head in the language, like German in this case,
Yeah.
for example. So like, oh, I'm imagining talking to people, and I don't do it consciously. It's like it happens. I'm starting to build sentences. Then
I have it as well. Mm-hmm.
yeah, then another important realization recently is so you start building them in your head, and you think you got them. Okay, I'm good. I'm good. Then you try to actually say them out loud, and first of all, pronunciation is all over the place. Like, what's going on? Like for me with German, with all those sounds like nicht, and I thought in my head, oh, I'm good. I'm my German is so good. But I said it to myself, like no pressure. But my goodness, that was hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's. I really recognize a lot of this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And with yeah, exactly. Like it makes sense in your head. Yeah. Um. And also, I think, okay, like there's a couple of things that come up for me. Like, first, I think you were mentioning it earlier, how some students really want to straight away say really complex things, And it's like, like this gradual thing, like, okay, now we can start speaking, but a little bit. Yeah.
yep,
Like,
yeah.
and like they just really want to, and, and I'm like, okay, but, well, again, trying to educate, like circumlocution, if you cannot if you don't know that word, well, you don't know it. Just say what you do know. But they just really want to say this whole complex thing. So it's again like
Yeah, yeah.
guiding them to this. Um, yeah. And I think when you were talking about your experiences, again, we already touched upon like learning languages that are similar to the languages that you already know versus different ones. But I think I'm having a lot of trouble with the interference of other languages. Like I really, and there is some research on that and stuff, but I noticed that I'm just by this at this point I'm already having like a mixture. For example, let's say with Russian and Ukrainian, because first I was learning Russian, then Ukrainian, and now I'm at the point where I try to get them closer, but it's just like a mixture that comes out, and it's similar. I don't know, like when I had Swedish, like first I had German, then Swedish. First it was like, oh my God, it's just German. Then it got to the point, okay, Swedish is better. And now when I try to speak German, it's just like Swedish, like sometimes I just, even when I'm teaching, sometimes I like write a word on the board and I'm like, what's wrong with this word? Oh my God, it's in Swedish.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, but it might take you a couple of seconds, but your brain knows then.
Yeah. But especially like in the speaking, like when you don't have that time to do it, like this is just, like I know, yeah, like there was maybe a lot written about this, but like in my personal experience, it is like something that I'm struggling with, like one of the most like at that point when in your head you hear it in Ukrainian, but when you get, I don't know, like to the middle of the sentence and you're trying to continue and then it comes in Russian. Or
It's not as fluent as in your head. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when the practice part comes into play as well. Well, because I feel it all the time. Like in my head, oh, I'm so fluent in my head. But then you said, and obviously in the real life conversation, you say what you wanted to say, the other person says something, so you need to come up with something else. So it's like
Mhm.
building, I was going to say building a muscle, but what I mean is retrieving what's in your head. It's another skill. I don't know if that's the right word, but a skill that we need. And how to accomplish that without actual practice, like real time retrieval, yeah. But anyway, but that's pretty interesting. And do you have any final message for language learners out there? Any encouragement and
Um, yeah, maybe Wait, let me think because I thought about this, but maybe I'm thinking even more about it. Yeah, I think the final message is about kind of following your heart, like following the curiosity and passion and pleasure. Like if they have the opportunity to not try to force or like to get into something that you should be doing, and like I think it's okay to uh follow the pleasure, although like it contradicts a little bit our conversation just now about like getting too cozy and um yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's again, it depends on what your goal is. Like it's like if your goal is to be able to understand the language, like
Yeah.
that's fine. Like I said, I'm there already with German. But I mean, I'd like to be able to communicate. That's my ultimate goal. Yeah.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say that recently I realized that I'd rather be able to do that in less languages than try to learn as many as possible, but never get to a point in which I can actually use them and communicate with people. That's another lesson I've learned recently. But anyway, but again, it's still fine if like I said, I could stop German right now, never use it again, and it would still be a great experience because that's a new language that I've learned. But that's not where I want to stop. But but if you want to use it, I try to be as honest as I can with myself first of all, but with like students, listeners, and so on. Because what's the point of being here and telling you that I've learned 15 languages? It's four. I haven't. But I just the first number that came to my mind. If I'm not, so I don't want to claim something that I'm not living or things like that. Want to help people.
Y- yeah. I often get this question like, oh, how many languages do you know? And I'm like, well, I've learned so many. Yeah, like probably I got to the 15 in how many I started learning. But that's again like with my personality, like I'm really eager to start something and then abandon it, or like there are different reasons. But yeah, there is this like I'm really like not wanting to answer that question when someone asks how many languages. And I'm like, wow, what does it mean to speak a language? And then people go, well, how many can you like communicate in? And it's like, no, like I don't know very good Polish, but like with my knowledge of like five other languages, yeah, like I can get by in Poland. I can like somehow do it like with the few words I have. Like it's not, you know what I mean? So it's not like that. But that I had one more thought about, for example, the difference actually how I do my YouTube videos and how I do my lessons because, on YouTube and now actually any new YouTube videos because, well, exactly because I'm putting my time and energy into the lessons. But how, well, because it's YouTube, because it is not interactive, like they can just watch it at their own time. So I do this, which is more pure comprehensible input based, like mostly story listening based, but basically, I think I have like a couple of videos where I explain some grammar in English, but I was really debating with myself if I should include it, and like that's a whole different story. But I think like this is perfect for the YouTube videos, and I think the reason why I wanted to do the YouTube videos is because it's very efficient in a way. When I was like having some crisis of like not being so motivated, I was telling myself like even if this video is the only thing that I make this whole week, like the only productive thing, well, okay, like if 20,000 people are going to watch it, it's still like giving more than however many lessons I would teach, more than I would have time for. But the thing is, that's why I wanted to transition into doing lessons, like to be able to have that interaction, to help with the speaking among other things, and to use a much wider range of not just the story listening or not just like giving the input. Yeah, like that's part of it, but we're reading, we're talking a lot, and like doing CI stuff, but like more interactive and like more fit, like you can make it really fit the individual needs and the group dynamic. And I really felt like this is what I want to spend time doing. Maybe it's, related to what we were just talking about, that it's more than just input, and that there is actually quite a lot of speaking, like especially in the high level group, like there's a lot, but I definitely like it's really much wider range of things, and like even yeah, like other activities, and I think yeah, maybe it is this, but okay, like you cannot just like keep giving input forever. Now also now all the people they have watched all my videos and okay, let's do something now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great for the first part of the journey, right? Like it's amazing. Like that's what people need actually. But yeah, true, true. Also, I forgot to mention it, but I leave the links to your channel in the description and title and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah.
And yeah, final thing that I wanted to mention that I heard Luca Lamparello talk about it recently, like a famous polyglot. He's my friend, and he talks about communication over performance. And that's I've been thinking about it recently, and it's really important because back to the school days, we're really used to performing, to being rated. So when we're speaking, you talked about it, like people try to build the whole sentence and sound sophisticated, and that's getting in the way of the learning because you just can't do it at that specific point. And I've reflected on it on my own journey, and that's the source of frustration many times, like wanting to perform as opposed to communicate. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that little piece.
And that really resonates, and I see it in my students because like I see all sorts of stuff, like for example we're having the lesson and we are, and I don't know, like maybe it's like I'm doing stuff wrong and I have to readjust my lessons, but I see them, for example, like I ask a question and I see them type a little bit into like either like I don't know, Google Translate or maybe Chat GPT, and then they say the answer, and I'm like I'm not, and like but whatever, like that means like that's a message for me that maybe they're not feeling comfortable, maybe it was too high level, or maybe there is, but I don't know, like sometimes even I try to pitch it in the right level, but there is, as I said, like the damage from their previous experiences and like this performance, or I have students, for example, asking, okay, like what's the topic for next time? Can you send us the vocabulary for next time? And like I cannot even always do it because sometimes I'm like, okay, like this is the topic, but who knows what comes up, like we talk about our weekends and maybe someone will talk about going for a hike. I don't know, like this woke up and like, but this idea of like, yeah, like wanting to already, as you say, like perform and like the yeah, and like using all the tools to achieve that. And I'm thinking again a lot about, like whether they are feeling comfortable, whether they are feeling I don't know, like, okay, this is why I'm not doing pure comprehensible input, because sometimes they're like, no, like we want the words, we want the whatever. Like if someone tells you, I want the grammar table because this is what helps me learn better. I used to be like, no, like I know better how you learn. And, maybe to some extent it's true in some way, but also like, like if, like I cannot just force, I used to be, I used to really be forcing people. Now, like you're not writing anything down, you're just gonna listen to me. But now I'm more like, okay, like if you need a grammar table to feel more secure, okay, here's the grammar table. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it is doing more damage than good, but I'm really prioritizing their autonomy because, as I said, that I had some negative experiences when someone who, I don't know, had a qualification in had a PhD in language teaching, told me how I'm supposed to learn, and it didn't fit me, and I hated it. So I'm not going to do the same to the teachers, to the students, even though my opinion might be like, oh no, like what are you doing? That like they know, but like it's, if we want to come back to Russian, it's about the like affective filter hypothesis. Okay, like if this is what they need because they are not ready yet to let go of the habits that they have, it's up to them, and like really leaving it up to them, first of all,
Yeah, good point. Good point. It's tricky. It's tricky because, like you said, you want to be humble and be open to new ideas and be open to accept that other things help them. But at the same time, like you said, you've done more research than they have probably. So, a lot of times people, I mean, and I'm sure it happens to me with other topics. It happens with languages, or let alone on the topics that I'm not as experienced in as languages, that you think something's helping you, but it's not really. It's tricky. It's always tricky.
Yeah, but I think just until you find the certainty that there is a new thing that's going to help you, you're kind of not ready to let go of the tool that has
Yep.
worked for you in the past. Maybe it has worked, or maybe it just seemed like it. So like you maybe need time to get comfortable in the new thing, and like maybe it has to be gradual, because if I'm going to be like, hey, this is how we do it because this is the best way, it's just not going to, like, the effective filter is not going to be low, and what we're going to achieve.
Yeah, you're stressed out. It's not gonna work anyway. Yeah. All right. That was great, Pauli. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And well, I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. And like I said, I'll leave the link to your channel. If you people out there want to learn Slovak with stories, that's your channel.
Perfect. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you again, and have a good day.
You too.
Bye bye.
Thanks so much for watching this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful for you. And if you want to know more about language learning, language acquisition, like, what's the best way to learn a language, ideas for language learning, the best resources at different levels, here you can find the whole playlist with all the interviews I've done so far with different researchers, teachers, polyglots, and so on. And finally, right here, you smash this guy right in the face to subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.